All right, it is 1 o'clock Pacific, which means it is time for another episode of Student Affairs Live. Student Affairs Live is your weekly web show for student affairs professionals with topics that student affairs professionals want to learn about. I'm your host, Eric Stoller, and today we've got a great show ahead of us. I'm really excited. We've got a special guest today. His name's Jeff Lael. I'll be bringing Jeff on in a second. And it's just going to be a really awesome show today, so I'm really excited. Let's see here if we can get the audio working for everybody. I've got a few comments, so let me bring that up. Welcome again, folks. This is going to be an awesome show. Once again, we're powered by Red Bull. It's a tie kind of day today on Student Affairs Live. Let me bring on Jeff here really quick, get a little introduction here. Jeff Lael is our guest. Hey, Jeff, say hi to folks.
Hey, how's it going?
Awesome. This is Jeff's first appearance on live video, so if he's a little shy, folks, please feel free to welcome him on Twitter. It'll be awesome. So everybody, we're going to be watching the action here again on HigherEdLive.com. That's where you can watch the show live. If you are not already there, please feel free to come on in. We're also going to be following the action on Twitter today. Use the hashtag SALive, that's #SALive. And please follow HigherEdLive. Ardith, our awesome intern, will be tweeting all episode long as HigherEdLive. Want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor. Our sponsor is Integral. They are the creators of the Schools app on Facebook. Make sure to check out their webinar series about how they can help you leverage Facebook to increase yield and retention. That webinar happens this Friday at 2 o'clock Eastern Time, and Ardith is going to send out a tweet with that link right now. So as always with every show, I like to start off with a little feature called Challenge and Support. It's sort of some clips, some snippets, some things I like to talk about in terms of the news, sort of the weekly highlights. And Jeff, feel free to jump in if there's anything you want to say or a comment that you have. I'll make sure I switch to you. So the first thing is, many of you probably saw this, but the governor of Arizona, Jan Brewer, vetoed a couple bills this week, some legislation. The main one that has to do with higher education was that she vetoed the legislation that had to do with conceal and carry on campus, stating that the legislation just was poorly written. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. A lot of people thought that was going to go through, and it didn't. So conceal and carry on campus in the state of Arizona on hold for now. So we'll see what happens in the future. All right, so switching quickly to New Jersey, Rutgers University had some more issues going on campus. There's this event called Rutgers Fest that Rutgers holds every year. Big event on campus, and it just kind of got out of control this year. And unfortunately, the leadership at Rutgers has made the decision that it's no longer going to happen. Rutgers Fest was just unmanageable. A lot of high school kids coming out, a lot of people who were not necessarily affiliated with Rutgers getting into trouble, and it just was a kind of a mess with campus police and security folks. So Rutgers Fest isn't going to be happening. So if you see some folks from Rutgers, pat them on the back because they need some love and care because it's been a rough week for them. Want to give a huge shout out to Mike Petroff. Mike put together a website called EDU Tweetups. EDU Tweetups is a really cool website that shows you higher education hashtags, Twitter conversations, and tweetups that are happening all in the world of higher education. So really cool website that's organized around what we do in higher ed around Twitter with hashtags and whatnot. So really cool site there. And holy buckets of sunshine, Batman. We are almost there. NASPA and ACPA, the voting has concluded for consolidation, and we're going to find out here fairly soon. On April 27th at 6 o'clock Eastern Time, there's going to be an email that goes out from NASPA President Patricia Tellez-Irvin, as well as ACPA President Heidi Levine, letting the membership know whether or not we have a consolidated organization or not, or whether or not we're still going to have two separate sort of generalist student affairs associations. So stay tuned. That's going to happen next week.
Eric, are you going to release your prediction?
My prediction, absolutely. I believe that, you know what, I really, the optimist in me, the idealist in me really hopes that it goes through. And so I'm going to say, yeah, consolidation happened, and it happened because we had a lot of people who voted yes. So we'll see. And last but not least, I shot a video last week on how I became a student affairs professional, and several of you shot your own videos and put them up on YouTube. So I'm really encouraging folks to shoot a little short video, post it on YouTube, and let us know the link, and we'll put it up on this post. We're just going to have a collection of clips on how people became student affairs professionals, because it's really interesting to see where people came from. Jeff, for example, what was your undergraduate major?
Chemistry.
Chemistry, exactly. And when you were majoring in chemistry, I doubt that you were thinking you were going to be a student affairs professional.
No, I was not.
Exactly. So you're a prime candidate, man, for that kind of a video. Anybody want to know how Jeff Lael became a student affairs professional? Put it up on Twitter. We'll get a little social stuff going here, and I guarantee you'll get a video of Jeff, with or without the headset. I'm not sure.
Stay tuned.
Exactly. All right, so everybody knows that I do a shout-out of the week. It's an unsolicited shout-out. I pick a person, an organization, a group, just who's done something good this week, who's put out something of interest. And this shout-out is to Apple this week. Everybody knows I'm kind of a Mac guy anyway, but the folks at Apple put together a video for the It Gets Better project, and their It Gets Better video from Apple employees is just rock solid. Take a look at it. It's in the same vein kind of as the NC State video that I showed last week or a week before, I can't remember which, but it's a really good video clip, and it'll definitely just let you know that it gets better, and it does. And it's especially important today because the guy from Rutgers, the student who unfortunately committed suicide because he was videotaped by his roommate, that came out in the news today about I believe it was his roommate was indicted on a hate crime charge. So this is really important stuff, so please pay attention to it. All right, so I'm super excited today because, first of all, this is only like the second time I've seen Jeff Lael in person, over the internet, I should say. We've communicated all the time. Sorry, Jeff, didn't mean to get you choking already. How it goes. We've talked through Twitter. We've talked on your podcast, the Campus Tech Connection that you do through Break Drink.
Yep.
Your professional life, you are you're the coordinator for programs at campus activities and let's see, what a title here. Does that actually say coordinator for programs in campus activities and programs at UNC Greensboro?
You got it.
I think any title that has programs in there twice is awesome. So
we really emphasize what we're about.
No, it's awesome. I know that it seems like you are working all the time. Every time I talk to you, you're in the union. There's a program, there's something going on. So
Yep.
Kudos to you. You're definitely working hard. So the topic for today's show, and again, folks, if you have questions, please tweet it out at HigherEdLive. But the topic for today's show is social media and professionalism. It's something that Jeff and I have talked about at length. It's something that we think about a lot. We're on Twitter, we blog, we're on Facebook. What's the difference between your professional self in real life, or IRL, versus your professional self online? And so I guess, Jeff, the first question I have for you today is, I feel like we have to define professionalism. I feel like we have to sort of start with, what is professionalism in the context of this conversation?
I would absolutely love to hear the folks on Twitter's opinions on this, but I would say, as you and I have talked about off the air, professionalism is a socially constructed medium. So professionalism in higher ed is going to mean something different than professionalism in the business world. Now, I think higher ed in particular, and I can't speak to every office because I haven't worked in every office, but the offices I've been in, particularly the student activities offices, I think tend to be fairly laissez-faire type of environments. Lots of opportunity to laugh and joke and, conversate with people. And that's part of what I like about it. But there is a certain amount of, what I would tell people is, you can't just say anything at work. There's a certain amount of discussion at work that needs to go on that's work-oriented and focused on work. But I think depending on the industry and office you work in, you're going to see different meanings of what exactly that professional decorum is. Okay.
I should point out that Ed Cabellin just commented on your beard, saying that it is fierce. It's reaching Kevin Guidry's stature, and that you're wearing a tie. I'd like to point out to everyone that this is probably the most bearded episode of Higher Ed Live or Student Affairs Live that there ever has been. So Jeff, I think people generally sort of have a sense of what is professionalism in real life. Those social norms that we've sort of been brought up around. We've worked in offices. We've seen what other people do, so other people model behavior for us. how do you think social media has influenced professionalism? Because it seems to me that it has had a decent impact on how we call professionalism or how we define professionalism in both real life now and in the virtual world or online.
Well, just think about this. The most basic example is we're now allowed to tweet and communicate on Facebook in the workplace. I think that was something that would have been unthinkable 10 years ago. Now, maybe they were doing this in a different medium, but allowing us to communicate with professionals and colleagues and possibly by extension students through these mediums is a change in professionalism itself. Now, one of my favorite reads, and I'd highly recommend everybody check this book out, was Amusing Ourselves to Death by, his name is slipping my mind right this second, you might know it. But what he talks about, and Clay Shirky has hit on this too, that the medium essentially dictates how we communicate. So I don't know that we've gone far enough with this social media to know completely the impact to our workplaces, but I do think we know on a basic level that just allowing those communications to take place is a sort of frame shift change in how we talk to each other.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's a shift. It's sort of like saying we didn't have the telephone before, and now we do. And what does that mean? You know, everybody could talk to you about your phone voice. You know, your professional demeanor when you're on the phone, when you're on a professional sort of call. When it comes to social media, and I think we'll probably end up talking a lot about Twitter, blogs, and Facebook today. You and I both have sort of our way of doing it, and you know we've talked about this a little bit. Tell me about your philosophy around having one account, two accounts. You know, do you separate sort of professional Jeff versus the personal Jeff? What do you think about that? I think because that's something that people struggle with a lot is the idea of I'm different in the social media space versus how I am in real life.
If I may bring in something I'm seeing on Twitter, I enjoyed Donald's comment on professionalism, and I'm going to edit it since we're on the air. But not being a jerk unless you're a lawyer. Well, I know what he means in a, you know, he's trying to make a joke. I think he has a point there, and I think that takes it back to that. What is the professionalism? And I'm sorry if I'm distracting from your question, and maybe we can revisit that in just a second. But I think he has a point there on how to act in the workspace. I know one of my main recommendations to people with regards to social media is don't say things on social media that you wouldn't say at your job, because your job and your employer are capable of viewing everything you say. And personally, I've had people come across me on social media, particularly my blog, who I did work with, and they just happened upon it. It wasn't that they were looking for me. Yeah. So I think that's an interesting commentary, and I apologize if I didn't address your question directly there, but I did also want to mention Laura's comment about the medium as the message is absolutely right on. We're dictated by the medium a lot more than the medium than we can change our use of the medium, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I think context is important too.
Yeah,
you have the idea to sort of broadcast out yourself in a way that you never could before. I mean, this is a number that I'll throw out there. I think I have about 4,000 followers on Twitter. I'm getting up there, right?
Right.
When I put something out there on Twitter that I could say to you, something maybe flippant or whatnot, and let's say it's read by a couple hundred people, it's all about the context of how they read that. And an example of this is and I'll just share this with you, is when I was at NASPA, I'm presenting an unsession on social media, and I was on stage, and a guy that I used to work with when I was in grad school and he was an undergrad said something just kind of flippant on Twitter, and it was, I took it as a joke because we know each other and we're friends.
Right.
But other people went after him on Twitter and saying, hey, how dare you say that to this guy when he's presenting? And so I think context is hugely important with this, because what that guy, who's a friend of mine, said wasn't a big deal, but other people saw it as such and came at him that way. So do you think that people sort of limit what they say sometimes because of that sort of ability to project something out there in a grander scale than before?
Well, I mean, isn't that essentially a overall communication question and not a social media question? I mean, I think especially you being someone who presents understands that messages you communicate are not necessarily the messages that people get. And I think we always have to ponder whether we're sharing information, whether personal, professional, online, like any context, whether that's an appropriate way to communicate that message. So I think those kind of misunderstandings, people tend to blow them out of proportion because it's in social media. But don't these kind of problems happen all the time in all sorts of contexts where people misunderstand something that they heard from a colleague? And, you know, the game telephone is essentially based around this idea that communication is inherently difficult. So I think that's a bigger question than just, are we using social media correctly there? It's a method of actually communicating questions. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Your bigger picture, it's not necessarily just dependent on social media. I guess the one thing with social media, though, is, and this happens to our students a lot, is, I'll just say it, students have been engaging in underage drinking for a very long time.
Yeah.
But Facebook has allowed that to be presented to the public on a grander scale, where
Right.
you know, you post a photo and then that photo gets copied and it's out there all of a sudden, and literally thousands upon thousands of people can see it. So I think it's the ability to project an identity of yourself in a grander scale, that I think that's where the idea of professionalism comes into play, because it's different, right? If we're talking one-on-one, or if we're talking on the telephone, how we represent ourselves, we're cracking jokes, we're saying certain things, inside jokes, that type of thing. But then when we get into the social space, you post something on your blog, it could be read by people at your university, outside your school, you name it.
Yep.
And that's game changing, right? In terms of communication and professionalism.
I want to play devil's advocate on that question a little bit. So let's assume that you are putting something out in the social media space and sharing it, and it is miscommunicated. I think that says a lot more about where we're at in the growth and understanding of people with social media. I think I hate that those incidents happen that you're bringing up with people getting caught, you know, taking pictures of themselves drinking and putting them on Facebook. There was a great article online on the New York Times, and I've mentioned this before on Break Drink because I thought it was very insightful. What they were discussing was the social media and Facebook and the way we treat it limit people's ability to make mistakes. Because I don't want people, like, to a certain extent in life, you are what you've done, okay? But I think a lot of us have an understanding of context and allow people to grow over a period of time. But the social media message, let's say that happened 5 years later, that person has, you know, maybe has even quit drinking. Well, the person who's got that picture without the context doesn't completely understand it, and they're making a decision based on what they saw in that picture. I don't think that's fair.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think as a society, we're not to the place, and I think that's indicative that we're not to the place of understanding what these tools are about and what they're actually communicating. So these people are almost like I hate to say it, almost like the sacrificial lambs of this learning process.
Right,
and
like the student. There was that student that posted. She was a nursing student, and she posted a picture of her holding a placenta in a tray. I mean, that picture is going to be on the web and Googleable with her name.
It's terrible, and people have used Clay Shirky's talk on social media that he gave back in 2007. Highlighted a lot of the positives and negatives of these technologies, and we've seen this used in horrible ways that cause people to commit suicide, and also used in amazing ways that people who, one of my favorite sports writers started out as a blogger, and now he's like producing television shows and things like that. So it's an amazing way for people to use it to communicate a larger message and share, and Iran and all this kind of stuff where people can communicate in these non-traditional ways. But he says in that talk, like, there are tremendous downsides to these technologies also, because the implication that we can communicate in such quick fashion and connect with people that we can't otherwise connect with can be used for good or bad. I mean, take it back to the TV. If you spend hours and hours a night watching stuff that's brain candy, well, your life is going to pass you by slowly. And I don't know another way to put that. But you can also use TV to watch, the State of the Union from your house. You can use it to learn about events going on in the world. You can use it to learn ideas, like there's positive and negative consequences positive, negative ways to use both things, but that doesn't imply that the tool is bad. And that also, taking it back to the professionalism discussion, I don't think we necessarily need to be in the business of saying this is bad or this is good. Like there are levels of bad or good. I've seen, putting on that TV thing again, I've seen folks who use that quote unquote trash TV as a way to decompress after a hard day of work. That's a very positive way to use it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're using it wrong. Does that make sense?
Right.
So it can be the same medium, the same message, the same tool, but it's not a dichotomous construct. It's more fluid than that.
Well, it's all about living in the gray. I think it's just
absolutely.
It's so easy to polarize something and say that this is the way to do it, this is the only way, and it's so individualized. For example, I've been blogging for a very long time. I've been on Twitter for quite a while, and I've made a ton of mistakes. I've written things that I wish I hadn't written, or if you were able to go back and read my first 100 tweets, you'd be in for a treat. And by treat, I mean they weren't that good. And at the same time, it was just me experimenting with the medium. And now, it's sort of like the larger you get, the larger your audience gets. It is an interesting conundrum, I think, for those of us who use these channels, these forms of communication, for a combination of everything, right? It's personal, it's professional. I use Twitter and my blog and to some extent Facebook to get jobs. Speaking gigs, consulting gigs, that type of thing. So could you speak to that a little bit? Because that's a little tricky when you've got sort of everything connected to it.
I wanted to engage one thing that you said there in your comment before I went on to that. I think it's really neat that you and I can both mention ways that we've done social media and said stupid things and been immature, and I like the way you framed that as you were testing the medium. I don't like that folks are telling people this is the way you have to use this or it's wrong. I think it's a tool, and I think people can use it to test and learn and try out things. And also, I think Jordan makes an excellent point on the Twitter feed. Social media, when public, allows us to be more intentional and reflective with what we put out there. Great point. I think there is room in this space, and I think there could possibly be more room. Especially, I don't know that New York Times proposals were 100% the way to go, but I do think they were heading some of the right directions about allowing folks to, essentially have a sunset on how long Twitter posts are archived and things like that. Could totally get behind that as an idea, to allow folks to experiment and try new things and sort of see how the medium works for them, without this implication that if you say one wrong thing, you're never going to get a job.
Exactly. It's changed the game. We're no longer limited to screwing up and having a few people, a limited number of folks seeing that we've messed up. And now it's, a lot of people can see that, but then it's about empathy and forgiveness and allowing folks the space to be, to just mess up, because we all mess up. And I think that you're absolutely right. When we start telling people that it's this way or no way at all, then it's limiting and it's constricting, and in some ways, like you said, professionalism is sort of it's a constructed concept, and we as a community get to decide, what is sort of in that sort of that spectrum, right? Because it's not just one way or the other; it's a spectrum of things.
Yep, totally.
So I wanted to point out too that there's been a lot of posts lately. You wrote a post how you use social media. Kevin Guidry, Laura Pasquini, Leslie Dare, and Ed Cabellin all wrote posts that were kind of in a similar vein around how they use social media, whether it's personal, whether it's professional. Ed's post was a little bit more on authenticity, and I want to bring up that concept because I think it ties in with what we're going over here in professionalism in social media and being authentic, because you tweet all kinds of stuff, right? You'll tweet about the weather, funny stuff, what you're up to, the sports teams that you're watching. Yeah, that's authentic Jeff Lale, right?
Yep.
I would say that that's also you being professional, because you're not saying anything that's going to get you in trouble.
Nope.
And again, it's not like there's social media police pulling you over and giving you a ticket either. I would hope.
I'll be honest with you. I started a hashtag called the passive-aggressive tweet whenever I feel compelled to post something that I shouldn't post. and it's my way of trying to filter that experience and not say stupid things online. I know that's kind of silly, but I think people who follow me understand that I have a sense of humor about these things and appreciate a laugh. So I saw Cindy posted something earlier today that was like, it's good that I don't have a blog so I don't go on a long rant about what just happened. I think there's a space there for sharing that in that context. Sharing that you're frustrated, sharing that you're having a hard day, but not necessarily putting someone on blast, as they might say. I think there's a place for that online.
Okay. I wanted to point out Stacey Oliver. I think she makes a great point, or it's almost a question in a way. We might actually address this. Is student affairs in higher ed, there's a push to be authentic, and that sometimes directly conflicts with sort of constructed expectations of professionalism.
Interesting.
Yeah, which I think is an awesome point, because you want to be authentic and you want to be professional. And I mean, I sometimes tweet as Yoda, for crying out loud. and I would argue that a little bit of revelry, a little bit of fun is okay. I mean, it's the kind of thing where you're not making fun of someone. Maybe you're making fun of yourself in a way if you're tweeting as Yoda. But you're just having a good time. And I think that sometimes it's hard to balance the serious with the funny a little bit.
That is an interesting point, and I would love to hear her tease that out a little more, because I don't know that I completely agree with that. I think our field does push for people to be authentic, but I don't know how hard we push, if that makes sense. I think, and again, I hate making comments like this because I haven't got the level of, I haven't worked in 20 offices. I haven't been in any functional areas other than student center work. So I'm strictly coming from that lens, but I do find that there's a pretty authentic level of conversation in our office. I think everybody likes to laugh and enjoy themselves. And I'd say that's been true in every office that I've been in. We talk sports, we talk politics, and, always tread carefully there. But I don't necessarily think that we are being unprofessional, while I think we can be authentic and professional. Am I wrong in that? Do you have a differing opinion on that? And I would love, Stacey, if you could try to tease that out a little more. That would be great.
Well, and I think, folks, you're doing a great job, by the way, of tweeting Jeff and I using the HigherEdLive hashtag. There was another point here that I thought was really good. It was from John Wesley Lowry, and I'm trying to filter through everything. Sort of on the issue of the personal and professional identities in social media, does the answer differ by level? Different for example, an SSAO or a VPSA? And, I think that's interesting. I think that personal styles almost dictate how we are in the social media sphere, because you'll see senior student affairs officers who tweet just goofy stuff because it's just
Dean Elmore is like one of my favorite Twitter accounts because he tweets some of the most amusing music. And Dean Elmore, if you're listening to this, I find your music amusing. I'm sorry, but
that's Ken Elmore, who is Dean of Students at Boston University.
Yeah, and he I think is very authentically himself on Twitter. I don't know if he's a sports guy, but I feel like I remember him tweeting some sports stuff. He shares his playlist for the day. I don't think he's a heavy tweeter. That's just a strange term to me. I don't think he's a heavy user of Twitter, but I do think when he does use it, I think he is himself. And this is a SSA or a VP, or excuse me, Dean of Students.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely room to be that authentic person as you move up the ladder.
It's your comfort level, right? It's just it's almost how you are in person. And if you've ever met Ken in person, he is exactly how he is on Twitter. He's charismatic. He's energetic. He's a funny guy. He's pretty brilliant, to be honest. So I think there's another question of more of a statement here. Something about, does authenticity require snarkiness? And this is from, I think it's Elena Weans. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. So the question of, does authenticity require snarkiness? And she would argue that it does. What do you think about that? Because I know you've put out some snarky stuff there, Mr. Leo.
Well, I have a healthy dose of sarcasm, as I'm sure many of my coworkers will tell you. So on that level, if that's who you are, just be who you are. I was actually really intrigued by Dr. J.W. Lowry, John Wesley Lowry, a few posts down from that. Does authenticity demand I tell you everything about myself? And does authenticity demand I share the details of my Vegas vacation? Well, I think as we know, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. But I actually was thinking about this the other day because while we were preparing for this, and I think for me, it's what would my followers find interesting and what's my level of comfort with sharing that? I mean, I know when I've traveled, I share pictures, I share, I check in on Foursquare and occasionally share that on Twitter if it's somewhere I think people might find interesting. I check in when I'm at locations that people are at and share that on Twitter. I think maybe is probably the thing. If you're out committing some sort of tomfoolery that you're not interested in sharing with the general community, I would certainly advocate you keeping that to yourself. It is Vegas, but I don't think it demands necessarily that you tell everything. I think authenticity is whenever you do decide to share something, be who you are.
Exactly. I think, I was thinking about this. The concept of authenticity to me isn't that you share everything. I don't think authenticity equals you share everything or the sum total of what you've got going on. It's about
totally
in real life. There are those people who, and I apologize, the landscaping crews have decided that today's the day to do their thing. There are those people in real life who we would label as fake. The people who you talk to and you know that they're not necessarily being legit with you up front. And I think that in the social media space, it's very similar. Those people who come across with genuine caring, empathy, they want to see you grow, they want to champion your success. You can tell when people are being real, and I think that's what authenticity is to me. It's not necessarily sharing everything that I've got going on. It's being the way I am in real life, which is just a real guy doing my thing. That's how I try to portray myself in social media, which is why you get everything from Red Bull, Star Wars, Yoda. I know half my tweets are about coffee, for crying out loud, and that's
well, man. On the honest level, let's say you are doing this show and people know you love Red Bull, and the show blows up. Well, the Red Bull people know that you love Red Bull. Does that make any sense? Like you're sharing yourself because it's things that you're interested in, and the idea behind Twitter and social media overall is that you're able to connect with people in non-traditional ways. So isn't it a wise idea, both for your professional life as well as the authentic piece, to share things that you like online? I mean, yeah. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, I think for me, it's just always felt natural to share a lot of myself. I think, everybody has sort of their own levels of what they're able to share and feel comfortable with what they do, what they're sharing. And with me, it's been pretty much everything, and I just don't share everything because I don't have that much time on my hands. But I think the other thing that your comment brings up to me, though, is the idea of when you're looking to get hired, when you're in that sort of job search process.
Yeah.
What happens then? Because let's say you put your Twitter account on your resume, you put your blog URL on your resume. People are looking at your Twitter account now. People are looking at your blog. Are you necessarily going to say some things that you would normally say, or are you going to edit it a little bit? Are you going to change it up, knowing that a potential employer without context could read a tweet and say, not necessarily going to look at that person anymore? I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I think there's an implication, certainly, if you're putting your Twitter account on your resume that you want people to look at it. I think the thing that makes me really curious is what about the ability to find people that, regardless of whether they've put their Twitter account on there or whatever they've shared, I think people are a little naive with the idea that they can be hidden on social media and use it and be hidden. But I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing. I think for me personally as a young professional, I think being able to prove that I understand the tools, and I think my blog and 26,000 tweets shows that I have at least a conversant understanding of the tools, and I think that's a marketable place for a young professional to be. And I have a hard time believing that there are that many places out there that are looking at your tweets and going, well, that person said this on January 5th, 1999. Well, I mean, like
we're going way back. Yeah.
Well, you know what I'm saying? Like, I have a hard time believing that they're disqualifying people based on one thing they said. I mean, that's like going around to all your high school friends and asking you if you've ever said anything negative about a student ever.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I know people are commenting on Twitter right now about that, and I think T.J. Willis says, do you want to work for someone who judges without asking? And I think that I'll play devil's advocate here, and I'll say, well, what if I'm an employer and I don't know you from anybody, right? I'm not necessarily judging. I'm just interpreting what I see you tweeting as, well, that's a really harsh opinion about XYZ. And they didn't see those tweets that you had with a conversation with other people taking place, because maybe they're not as well versed in using Twitter and sort of figuring out how people are talking to one another. So they get maybe they see one tweet, and that one tweet is something that just puts a bad taste in their mouth, because without context, I don't think they're judging. I just think they're saying that's the only way that they kind of see you representing yourself out there.
Right. Are you familiar with the concept, and this was something I read about when I first started looking at doing a blog and social media, and kind of had, first 1,000 Twitter posts were up, and was starting to blog a little bit. And I remember seeing an article about the idea of putting so much out on the internet that people can find it. Does that make sense? You're on Twitter, you're on Facebook, you're on LinkedIn, you're on About.me, and not that you're necessarily actively participating in all of this. It's about having enough content out there that there's more context for people when they do see that one thing that they don't like.
Yeah. Well, I think it's becoming more and more the norm, where employers will Google you and will look at all the stuff that's out there. I mean, if they Google me, they're going to find a ton of content.
Exactly. So if they're choosing to pick and choose one line that I said, 5 minutes ago, and not look at the context and the holistic piece, I think that's not going to be a place that I'm going to enjoy working very much.
Well, it's tough too. I think that the media, in many ways, perpetuates that idea, right? You look in the political sphere, a politician says one thing, maybe it's on Twitter, a blog post or a comment or something, and that one comment gets just hurled around the internet, and it doesn't take into account all the other things that they may have said that would have, obviously been much more valuable. So it's an interesting place, and I think it goes back to the idea that when did we stop allowing each other to make mistakes when it came to new communications tools? So, I think there's, again, folks, you're doing a great job with tweeting at SA Live. I know Jeff and I are following the Twitter conversation here. Laura Pasquini says, does more content equal more context to someone? Which I like the idea of knowing that there are, I think, 11 people named Eric Stoller in the U.S., and a couple of them are lawyers. And for me, I want, if you Google my name, I want it to be my content that comes up, and I stand behind the things that I've posted, video, images, text, you name it. And it's almost like my professional resume is moving more and more towards just, here's my resume, Google my name, versus your standard, bullet-pointed resume that people are putting out there.
I think I want to address one of the comments that chances are you could be followed by future employers and employees. Of course, but I think one of the oft-repeated refrains in this field is how small it is. And I know we're talking about Student Affairs Live, so that I'm not putting that out in any other context. But, the things you do in this field are not isolated. So I don't think that that's a particularly huge issue for higher ed online, because I think that's a huge issue for higher ed overall. Anything you do in this field is going to be echoed and repeated and shared. So I don't necessarily think that, there needs to be people afraid, but I think you need to be understanding that people can find you. So choosing to engage on these tools, regardless of what you put your, your username as, even if you think you're protected, people can find you, if they want to. Wouldn't you agree that protecting and putting all these security settings does not stop anybody from getting your information?
Well,
if they want to, I should put.
Yeah, well, again, it's almost personal preference. I think it comes down to whenever people try to put together documents around how individuals should handle themselves in social media spaces. Yeah, it's such a individualized, unique way of doing it. I always start with social media doesn't equal a sort of common sense lobotomy, right? Like the common sense that you have in your work world that you've had for a long time before social media was even on your radar should continue as you get into these online spaces. And as long as you do that, as long as you're not mean or cruel or, trashing someone intentionally to cause them harm or putting out misinformation, you're probably going to be okay. And for some folks, I totally respect their need to make their Facebook account private or their Twitter account private. I mean, sometimes folks are dealing with stuff that we don't know about, and it's so easy to get caught up in make it public, because it's a safe place. Well, some folks, maybe they don't feel safe, and I totally respect
totally
that. And
totally.
And I think that it comes again to, you want to have 2 Twitter accounts, you want to have sort of professional you and your personal stuff. That's fine. If you can manage it and it works for you, go for it. I think that it's about whatever works for you, whatever feels right for you. And for some of us, like when you said, when you Google your name, it's all you, right? It's you on Twitter, Flickr, Facebook, your blog, all over, right?
Yeah.
So
let's look at this from the employer perspective as well. So let's say the employer does find something, and I'm not talking about somebody, trash talking with their friends or something like that. But if your views that you're sharing on Twitter are not necessarily coherent with what their office views, then I totally understand them not hiring you. I think it's about finding that fit. And different offices, one of the comments I got while we were discussing and people were emailing me about the show was, I want to not let my social media be an impediment to a future employment situation. And I just have never looked at it that way. And I am free to admit that I may be wrong about this. But I want a situation where I work, and in the context that I work in, to be a mutual fit to as much as it can be, and a place that not only am I looking to be, but the employer wants me to be there because I'm the right fit for their office. And so that's why I'm authentic on this social space. Can I take a step back for myself?
Sure.
I started engaging in social media largely because I saw, for the folks who have not read Crush It by Gary Vee, interesting read for folks who are considering engaging in social media and using it to leverage it for professional work. I kind of had hit on these ideas before I actually read his book a year ago. I saw social media, Facebook, Twitter, blogging, all this kind of stuff, particularly YouTube at that time, but more the blog as time went on, as opportunities to get myself outside of the context where I'm having to go through the traditional channels and to share and connect with people like yourself, and Ed Cabellin, and people like that who have become mentors and, dare I say, idols to me in this space, because I think it's such an opportunity to step outside, be who you are, and share yourself with people in all levels that you may never connect with otherwise. To me, that's a no-brainer networking thing. And so instead of looking at my blog as I have to blog about student affairs all the time, I look at it as I want to share those pieces of my identity and my interest that I may end up having interest in working in sometimes should the opportunity present itself. So a lot of my blog, if folks don't realize this, I have a very cohesive online identity. All of my things are things that I'm very interested in and would gladly leverage to do professionally. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So,
it's all you, right? It's when we interview for a job, they don't just say, well, generally speaking, they don't say something like, just tell us all about what you do with student affairs, because that's your whole life. It's what are some books that you recently read, or what do you do for fun? What are your hobbies? You get that one a lot, and I think that when you have a sort of identity online through a blog, Twitter, etc., that's where you get to really shine and just show people who you are. And with you, it's sports, it's economics, it's like punditry, right? It's the trying to get some opinions out there that start some conversation. And,
absolutely.
And I think that Lane Joplin makes a great point. 3 years ago, she sent out her blog URL in a follow-up email to a future boss. It was by accident, and it's what helped to get her the job.
Thank you. I want to give her the slow clap.
Yeah, right. That's you heard it here, folks. 2 things: Ed Cabellin equals idol, and Jeff Lale started the slow clap. I think we've hit a milestone today on Student Affairs Live. Folks, thanks again for commenting and asking so many questions. I will say this, Jeff Lale's beard really deserves its own hashtag at this point. I think people have been talking about it pretty much all episode long, saying that it's grown more as we've gone on, saying that he looks like Ryan Gosling, and yeah, it's fantastic. I love all the tweets about Jeff's beard here.
I just want to say, for the folks who are seeing it now, they should have seen it right before I left for NACA. It was absolutely out of control. Yeah, I go for the mountain man look a little bit, and I'm under orders to not get rid of it.
I like to call that the Gandalf. That's the particular cut I call that one.
That sounds about right.
So there's a lot of undergrads coming up who are using social media now on a daily basis. You know, they're blogging, they're posting stuff on Facebook. They're starting to get into Twitter a little bit more. I saw a comment earlier on the hashtag stream about incorporating social media education into orientation. What do you think about that?
I don't necessarily have a problem with that, and I actually think it could be a positive thing. But I'm curious of where you think we're at on even knowing what that would be. Does that make sense? And I have a bad habit of using "does that make sense?" I apologize to the listeners. But
so it's okay. There are certain catchphrases that we all use, and we're taking. Yeah. There's a tally sheet. We're keeping track. I think it would be interesting to do, just because I've stated this before, that our students come in usually with a healthy amount of expertise when it comes to using different technologies from an entertainment side of things. They're fairly adept at that. But when it comes to using technologies and communication mediums like social media from a context of it's something that's out there forever, and yeah, you're going to make some mistakes, but how's it going to evolve into a place where you put stuff out there, you're authentic, but you're still professional?
Right.
I think that's going to be interesting, and I think that sort of planting the seed to our students during an orientation program, saying, here's some things to think about. You know, I don't like policies. I prefer guidelines. It's almost the idea of here's some concepts to pay attention to.
Yeah. I think sharing some of those cautionary tales is not a bad idea, because I know that we are the techie, student affairs folks to a certain extent, but I think sharing those tales of people who have tweeted things about interviews and have posted pictures of themselves acting, just to use another synonym, is haberdashery going to be a synonym for tomfoolery? I like using all sorts of interesting synonyms. But anyway, going back to that question, I think sort of sharing those cautionary tales and then saying, it's great if you guys want to use this, and there's certainly a piece that you can use this to leverage yourself professionally and connect with friends and keep up with family and whatnot. But, don't be a dummy, as they would say.
Exactly. Well, and I'll throw in shenanigans there as well.
Shenanigans and tomfoolery.
Yeah. I mean, we're throwing out all the stops here. Well, again, it's that sense of whatever you're doing in real life that works for you, it's probably going to work okay in social media. And one thing, though, that I wrote down as a question: do you think that we were really that professional to begin with? Because honestly, I think social media has exposed some folks.
That's a great point.
The assumption was we were all professional, and then social media came in, and then we started being less professional.
Yeah.
I would challenge folks to sort of think about the idea of, were we that professional to begin with, and is professionalism evolving? And it's a moving target. One day you're professional, the next you're not necessarily as professional as you thought you were.
Yeah, I think particularly, I'm forgetting the company, but I want to say it was Cisco, that the young lady tweeted about her negative experience there, and, well, I'll just take the job because it pays well. Mm-hmm. I don't doubt that she would have shared that comment with everyone she knew, but I think she did not necessarily know her employer was seeing it. And you have to think about this again from the employer perspective. That's another insight into that person, and like you said, that exposed her for being who she was. Someone who was taking advantage of the situation in order to use it, and didn't necessarily want to be there and was going to bounce as soon as she had the opportunity. So to me, that's an indication that she wasn't a fit there, and wasn't ever destined. And it's almost like social media said, okay, well, you're done, and took her out of that situation. And I would argue that she maybe should have taken herself out of that situation anyway.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of Heather Armstrong. Are you familiar with her?
I don't know. You have to tell me the story.
So Heather Armstrong writes Dooce.com, Dooce, and there's the slang on the web now. If you get fired for writing something on your blog and it was derogatory towards the company, then you just got deuced. Because that's what happened to her. She was writing. It was kind of an anonymous thing. She never actually said to this day what company that she was working for.
Yeah.
But she was writing about her employer, and they let her go. And I think that there's that aspect too. It's not just how you represent yourself to get the job. It's when you're bashing your employer, because you see that a lot. You'll see people bashing where they work on their blog or on Twitter or Facebook, and you got to wonder. I don't think that's professional in real life. If you're bashing your work, if you're bashing your work in a public forum, because that's what social media is. It's a public forum.
Totally.
You wouldn't go up to an audience in an auditorium with a microphone and say, I don't really like my job, and this is the reason why. Well, if you put that on Twitter, you're doing the same exact thing.
Totally.
And people do it though. They don't seem to understand that. It's like there's this dichotomy, right? Like there's this switch that gets flipped, and they think it's okay to say something on Facebook or their blog because they think it's anonymous somehow.
Well, and I think that's the educational piece that we were talking about earlier, possibly educating students during orientation, that might be positive, is saying, what is this? A brief introduction into what is Twitter, what is Facebook, give them some principles of how it works, how to connect with folks if they want to, like things like hashtags, and then, give them a couple cautionary tales. But I am very resistant to the idea of here's social media and how you must use it, because I don't think that serves anyone. I think it's essentially creating that dichotomous construct that we talked about earlier, and it's saying that we have to use it the same way. Everybody has to use it the same way.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem if folks only want to use social media to I have a friend who has a blog about his child that he uses to keep up with his family that lives across the country. That is a brilliant way to use social media, and that's not wrong, and it's not unprofessional, and it's not improper.
Yeah, exactly.
And if someone wants to get on Twitter and conversate with their friends, as long as they realize that the public can read it, I don't have any problem with anything they want to talk about.
Yeah. I mean, it's like email, right? None of us just send email for professional reasons.
No, absolutely.
We email our parents. I email my mom. My mom sends me text messages, for crying out loud. And I think that people sometimes want to stick this sort of social media communications sort of way of being into very strict parameters. And I think that's what limits us, right? It limits that sense of being creative, of being innovative.
Absolutely.
And again, communal norms will always dictate what is and what is not professional.
Absolutely.
And once I think Ed made a point here, Ed Cabellin, as I was reading the stream, about we're just sort of in our growing stage, that we're still figuring out what this means for student affairs professionals and just professionals in general, because it's like you said, there was that person who got canned from Cisco because of something she wrote. So, Jeff, any final thoughts or anything you want to put out there to folks who are watching on the tweet stream? I know we've got quite a few folks paying attention right now, so yeah.
I think I've hit on a lot of concepts that I wanted to hit on. I think, to me, I've always seen social media as an opportunity and not as something to be terrified of. I think, as Don said, if you're talking to people, and I've had the opportunity almost by accident, and you and I talked about last night how it's almost like we stumbled into being able to talk and present on social media. I think presenting it as, here's what it is, here's some dumb things that people have done, don't be dumb, is probably a healthy way to communicate, and then let them sort of get on there and figure out what works for them. I would encourage people, though, it is really amazing to me, the communication and the connections I've been able to make on Twitter, and the opportunities I've had to do things in the whole social media space, and I include podcasting, that are interests that I never would have thought I would have been able to do. I mean, I'm soon going to be hosting 2 podcasts on sports. That is like a life dream of mine, slowly coming to reality. And, being able to be on this show, there's no reason you and I should have ever met. Let's be honest here. There really isn't. We operate in completely different spheres to a certain extent. And, being able to get connected with Jeff and Break Drink, I knew Jeff, might have met Jeff through some connections that I had, but there was really no reason for us to develop a relationship to the point that he would ask me to be a part of that community. So I use social media, and I try to put things out there in a way where, I think this is interesting. I wonder if other people do, and let's see if we can connect and maybe work together. And I've always looked at it as an opportunity, even from back when I first started doing this. And I hope that other folks view it as an opportunity. And I would just encourage you, see what's out there and don't be a dummy.
Well, thanks, Jeff. I think that, what I'm getting from you, the core message is, use common sense, or,
Yep.
Try to, if you don't know, ask a friend. That's the other thing too, is you can always ask a friend or a colleague or a professional peer and say, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? Give me some insight, because sometimes we just don't see things until we've talked it over with a friend or a colleague. And I think that's something that, the other thing too is you can put something out there on Twitter from your phone when you're out and about, when you're maybe not necessarily in the right frame of mind to do it. Maybe you're angry about something, or you're sad, or like you're the Red Cross tweeter and you're getting slizzard. Maybe
he made a mistake too. I had a conversation with a student last week about not firing off angry emails. Doing anything that's communicating with people when you're angry and haven't had an opportunity to reflect and ponder, I would argue is a bad idea.
Absolutely.
Going and yelling at your boss because you're angry is probably not the most effective way to get your ideas across. So I think that it obviously extends to the Twitter space, and I think common sense is always in order.
Absolutely. Well, and one last thing too is, if folks are just getting started using social media, maybe they want to start a blog, maybe they just got their Twitter account. Most people are on Facebook. I mean, let's face it, it's a huge medium right now. But there's a ton of things out there. There's a ton of tutorials, and there's an awesome community that's willing to just work with you and share knowledge. And I think that people tend to forget about that, right? I mean, you can enter into this space, and there's a lot of folks who will help you out.
Yep. Feel free and shoot me emails and anything, Twitter posts or anything like that. I'd be happy to talk you through and do all I can to get you engaged in the way that you're interested in being engaged.
Well, Jeff, let me put up your Twitter information here so folks can at least see that. My guest today has been Jeff Lale, and he tweets at Jeff Lale. And as you can see there, Jeff's got quite the colorful Twitter bio. All sorts of stuff going on in Jeff Lale's world, which really, I think, underscores the fact that, again, you can be everything. Your whole person is on Twitter. You're not cut into bits and pieces. You're funny, you're professional, you're sharing stuff, you're asking questions, and that's all of you, and you're representing yourself well in that space.
Can I give a brief shout out to my employer, the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and Campus Activities and Programs, for allowing me to do this and being really supportive of my efforts to engage in this space. So kudos to them, and thanks to everybody who hopefully maybe a few of them are watching.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jeff, for being on the show, and we will chat some more about this topic because it is extremely relevant.
Enjoyed it.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, folks. Well, this has been another episode of Student Affairs Live. Want to just give a quick shout out to what's happening next week. I'm going to have Julie Kirchmeyer on the show. We're going to talk about res life and housing. Julie works at Southern Illinois University at Carbondale, and she has probably the longest title ever. I believe it's Associate Provost of University College and Director of Housing. I probably messed that up, but I'll fix it next week for sure. Once again, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor. Student Affairs Live is sponsored by Integral, the creators of the Schools app on Facebook. Be sure to check out their webinar series about how they can help you leverage Facebook to increase yield and retention. That happens this Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. And once again, Ardith will be sending out the link for that particular webinar. And I'm really just excited, folks. There's been a lot of community activity here on the HigherEdLive hashtag, and it's been, once again, really thrilling for me to be your host. So yeah, Julie Kirchmeier is up next week. The week after that, Jennifer Joslin, who's the president of NACADA, as well as a director of advising at the University of Oregon, will be on the show. And then I've got a little bit of a break, and then starting up, I think, on May 18th, I'll be doing another live show again. So thanks again for watching, folks, and as always, take care of yourself, folks.